Is that your signature to this affidavit?
996. Yes, sir. It is my signature.
And can you confirm that this is your affidavit, and are you comfortable with the correctness of the facts in this affidavit?
Can you say that again?
Can you confirm that the facts in this affidavit are correct?
Correct, sir.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Mbete, is it correct that some week ago or so, you prepared a written version of what you intended to be your introductory remarks, and that we find those at pages 998 to 999?
Nine hundred and
998, and when he refers to page numbers, always look for the black numbers on the top left-hand corner.
998 to 999, yes. Yes.
And is it correct, Mr. Mbete, that you have furnished to me today a revised version of the introductory remarks?
Yes, Chairperson.
I'll come to those shortly. Ms. Mbete, if you go to page 1000 through to page 1004, can you confirm that that is a further document you prepared in relation to your testimony today, headed Pertinent Matters Relating to the period of 2014 to 2019?
Yes, Chairperson.
Chair, I will come shortly to deal with the revised introductory remark, but those are not yet paginated in accordance with the system of the Commission. So in these circumstances, I request leave that we admit as annexure ZZ16 the affidavit starting at page 980, the further document which I've just referred.
Before we do that, Mr. Freund, I note that on the version of Ms. Mbete's affidavit that I have, although she has signed it, the Commissioner of Oaths, there is a stamp and there's some signature, but I don't know whether that's the Commissioner of Oaths, the part where normally one finds the signature of the Commissioner of Oaths is without a signature, but I see there's a stamp and some signature, but I don't know whether that is the signature of the Commissioner of Oaths. Of course, it's not every page is initialed, but the initialing might be one thing. This is the signature of the Commissioner of Oaths is the more important aspect. Unfortunately, I can't read there, but it may be that it is the Commissioner's certificate. I certify that, but then it's not legible. Do you know anything about that part?
Chair, might I intervene?
Sorry?
Might I just intervene?
Yeah.
Just to indicate that the copy that I have, which may or may not be a better copy than the copy that you have, suggests to me that a certain warrant officer who was a policeman or a police official did sign and commission this in the version that is stamped. But that's a matter that perhaps the witness would be in a position to confirm.
Does it indicate that that police officer is a Commissioner of Oaths? The stamp.
No, in fact, on the contrary, Chair, now that I look at it more carefully, it certifies that it's a true copy of the original, so it's the wrong stamp.
Yeah. Yeah, so, of course, the fact that she will confirm, or she has confirmed that the contents of the document are correct, true and correct, will confer on the contents the same status as that of an affidavit. So maybe we should not be concerned about it, but maybe it could be replaced after today with an affidavit that is properly commissioned, so that anybody who finds it doesn't think that it was an irregular affidavit. Well, what do you think, Mr. Freund?
Chair, that would certainly seem to be in order with me, and since the witness is legally represented, I imagine that we could ask, we could request assistance in that regard.
Mr. Semenya, what do you say?
I would agree with a resolution of the problem by filing an affidavit subsequent to her testimony.
Yes. Okay. No, that's fine. So Ms. Mbete, after today, if you could have this affidavit, the contents will be fine, but maybe it can be printed again and be commissioned properly. It's obviously not your fault, but maybe the person who signed, the police officer, is a commissioner of oaths, but the certificate doesn't seem to describe him or her as a commissioner of oaths. But your legal team will assist in that regard. Okay.
Thanks, Chairperson.
We can continue. But you have confirmed that the contents of the document, let's call it an affidavit, is they are true and correct as far as you are concerned. Yeah.
Yes, Chairperson.
Okay, all right. Mr. Freund, continue.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mbete, as we've already referred to, you have now prepared a revised version, revised written version of your introductory remarks. Is that correct?
Can you say it again, Mr. Freund? I lost something in what you were saying.
Is it correct, Ms. Mbete, that you have now prepared a revised written version of your intended introductory remarks?
Yes, Chairperson.
And Chair, I've been informed that a copy of that revised written version should be on your desk. Is that correct?
Yes, I have what I believe is the revised version, separate from the bundle. Yes.
And Chair, with your leave, what I would suggest is that in due course we just add that to the end of this exhibit once it's been duly paginated.
Yes, or it could replace the one that is in the bundle, because I'm told there is one that is in the bundle.
Right.
And then with regard to the admission of Ms. Mbete's affidavit, shall we do that after we have one that will have been properly commissioned, or do you suggest this should be admitted?
Chair, my suggestion is it should be admitted because the witness is going to be asked about it in the questioning today, and then we can supplement that by a duly commissioned, properly attested affidavit.
Yes. Okay. You request that I admit it and mark it as exhibit?
ZZ16.
16. Okay. The affidavit of Ms. Baleka Mbete that starts at page 980 will be admitted and marked as exhibit ZZ16. Okay?
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mbete, subject to the Chair's directions, my suggestion is that this might be the opportune time for you to make the introductory remarks that you wish to make.
I give you that opportunity, Ms. Mbete, to make your introductory remarks.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Yes.
Chairperson, today I appear here willingly to talk about my past role in Parliament as Speaker in the National Assembly and to convey my commitment to the purpose and envisaged outcome of the Commission's work. I thought by way of introduction, I should first share with the Commission a little bit of my background. Chairperson, I left the country in 1976 and joined the ANC in Swaziland. I returned to South Africa in June 1990 and continued to work in different capacities towards the new South Africa's constitutional dispensation. The key areas in which a lot of my life was contributed were for the advancement of women's rights, and I'm also a devout cultural worker. I was elected the first Secretary General of the ANC Women's League after the unbanning. I was part of the ANC delegation to the South African constitutional talks towards the interim constitution and later the final constitution. I became Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly in 1996. I've since spent many years being part of the leadership of the evolving legislative sector in the new democratic state. In my last term in Parliament, I saw the finalization of the Rules Book, the 9th edition, in the National Assembly, and led the high-level panel program at the Speakers Forum as its chairperson. I was a founder member and national convener of the Progressive Women's Movement of South Africa in 2006. My first experience at leading a national, non-partisan entity. During the transition in 2008, I was appointed Deputy President of South Africa. At the 2007 ANC National Conference, I was elected the first woman national chairperson of the organization. In that role, I led the ANC's national program of marking the centenary of the ANC until the centenary conference in December 2012. My term as chairperson ended in 2017. At an international level, I was a member of the Africa Peer Review Mechanism. I was also a founder member of the Pan-African Parliament and its Committee on International Relations. I am currently a founder trustee of the National Liberation Heritage Institute of South Africa, NALISA, which seeks to pursue the unearthing, better organization and preservation of the history of our people's proud legacy of freedom. Having concluded the aspect about my background, Chairperson, my understanding is that this commission gives us the opportunity as a democracy in the making, among other things, to be self-critical and to honestly address the warts we see in the mirror as the Commission listens to what happened in the past. The need to enhance the capacity of Parliament is already part of the testimony before Commission. I wish to build on what has already been said in this regard, Chairperson. The first Parliament after the 1994 elections had the task to discuss the Constitution in its capacity as a constitutional assembly, to finalize the constitution-making process which had started at the World Trade Center and produced the interim constitution. A Schedule 4 of 34 constitutional principles was the basis on which the final constitution was to be judged by the Constitutional Court. Constitutional Principle number 6 made provision for the 3 separate arms of the state, which are the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. And I quote, "There shall be a separation of powers between the legislature, executive, and judiciary, with appropriate checks and balances to ensure accountability, responsiveness, and openness," close quotes. The political culture has since evolved, which has given the executive what, in my view, are unequal powers that militate against the principle of separation in relation to the other arms, in as far as procurement of finances from the national fiscus for work of each arm is concerned. The judiciary's budget is through the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, and that of Parliament also comes through the Minister of Finance. This is not in keeping with the spirit of this original relevant constitutional principle 6. If anything, it is a practice which unwittingly promotes the supremacy of the executive as opposed to the separation of powers. One of the most important negative results of this has been that our President's role has been confined to head of the executive, as opposed to him acting as actual head of state as well. As head of state, the President's preoccupation should be fairly spread, covering all arms of the state, as opposed to sometimes being so drawn into the nitty-gritty of only one of the arms. The President must be above the dynamics of everyday politics, but must be reasonably accessible to all 3 arms of state. The above anomaly must change, and the correct approach can be attained if a process which was left unfinished during the 4th term were to be finalized. This was when the then heads of the 3 arms of state engaged on the matter. And in brackets, I have Speaker Sisulu and Chairperson Mahlangu from Parliament, Chief Justice Ngobo, and President Zuma, who had correctly gone back to the constitutional principle 6. The former DG in the presidency, Dr. Lubisi, headed the technical team, and he was the one to retire most recently, about a year ago. Had this process been completed, we as a democracy would have learned a lot from other countries that had been identified around the globe. That exposure would have helped us improve our own system, and I believe it is not too late to correct ourselves. My view is that the committee section in particular needs a great boost in terms of resources for them to extend the portfolio committee members' capacity to do a lot more by way of oversight. They could be better enabled to do oversight on more entities in their respective portfolios than they've been able to do so far. In addition, every MP needs a lot more to spread themselves across the many other different roles they play, including in the constituencies and communities whose needs they have to help look after. Correcting the imbalance, which is referred to above, would go a long way in improving Parliament's oversight work in general, and broadly the capacity of every public representative. The environment in which politics plays itself out daily is one in which our people remain very alert and sensitive to the often politically highly charged media reports. Sadly, not all media reporting is always based on accurate, factual, and verified evidence. The Zondo Commission has heard testimony in this regard. As a result, South Africa was shocked by my decision of the 8th August 2017 in relation to the secret ballot. It was unexpected as it was not in keeping with what had been dished out in the public domain for a very long time, which had been contrary to reality and fact. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Ms. Mbete. I must just say that when the commission started in 2018, I think you were still the speaker. I must just record that you provided very good cooperation to the commission in terms of various documents and records that it wanted, and you assisted the commission with the reports of various portfolio committees. Thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, Ms. De Freund, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mbete, perhaps we could start at paragraph 1 of your affidavit, that's on page 980. Just for the record, can you confirm that you are a former Speaker of the National Assembly, that you've served twice in that capacity, firstly in the period 2004 to 2008, and then secondly in the period 2014 to 2019?
Yes, Chairperson.
Ms. Mbete, I'm then not going to deal with paragraphs 2 through to 9, in which you set out certain legal background, which the Commission is familiar with. If I could take you to paragraph 10 of your affidavit, page 983.
Yes, Chairperson.
I just would like to give you a brief opportunity to make the points that you make in paragraph 10.1 through to 10.9, where you're drawing attention, and I don't think there's any controversy about this, to some of the instruments which exist and which have been created by Parliament in order to discharge its constitutional oversight mandate. Perhaps you would just like to put on record very briefly what you see as these main instruments for oversight.
Well, the main instrument through which Parliament exercises oversight is the committee system. It is the fact that we divide the members of Parliament into portfolio committees relating to each of the portfolios in the executive, in order that those committees can have direct line of sight of what's going on in that particular portfolio, including interactions with the relevant people that will be working across in the executive that they would need information from, and so on and so forth. So committees are a very, very important part of the way through which Parliament exercises oversight, because it is in those smaller collectives that members of Parliament are able to sit, look into reports, look into issues, if they need to travel to various points of the country to familiarize themselves with the matters with which they are being informed by way of documents and reports and so on and so forth. So committees are a major part But secondly, we have various activities as the House through which questions for information or clarification or occasions are made possible for members of the executive to come and share information with members of parliament. So questions are very, very important. And throughout the calendar year, there will be parts of the time that is allocated for those particular activities that would make it possible for members of the executive to come and answer questions in the House. But in addition to that, you have the head of the executive being the president, as well as the deputy president, also coming on certain calendar days that would have been agreed through the Parliamentary Program Committee, that it is time for them to appear before Parliament to come and answer specific questions that would relate to those matters that are under their own particular responsibility, as would have been shared between Parliament and the executive. So those are some of those activities and ways in which Parliament does make use of certain mechanisms and tools that are there at their disposal to ensure that this oversight is exercised.
If I can take you to paragraph 10.1, where you refer to the fact that there are as many committees of Parliament as there are portfolios of government, that's clearly correct. But an aspect that has been debated with your successor as Speaker, Ms. Modise, also with your successor as Chairperson of the party, Mr. Mantashe, is whether there might be value in some type of committee or committees or structure that focuses specifically on the President and the Presidency, whether there should be, as it were, a portfolio committee in relation to the Presidency. Do you have any views on that question?
That's a matter, actually, that has been chairperson before Parliament for some time. The proposal has been made, and we have been looking at it and turning it around and checking whether there would really be a reason why there would be a specific committee exercising oversight over a president who, in fact, has divided up the executive function into the various portfolios. And as we know, in our country, we've got about 30, mid-30s number of portfolios of government, and in the way Parliament structures itself, it ensures that there's a collective of people looking specifically at each of those portfolios. And really, the debate is still out there. I mustn't say we're done with it, but there hasn't been anything compelling, really, at this point. It does not mean there is no way or there will never be a day when those that don't yet feel convinced there's a necessity are not convinced. Maybe a case can still be made.
Well, can I put to you for your comment that actually a compelling case is illustrated by the history of the Fifth Parliament, that there were ongoing serious allegations implicating the President, the Presidency, the President's family, and there was no portfolio committee that considered it within its remit to investigate and to deal with those, and that might illustrate precisely why there might be merit in some type of committee with oversight over the President.
Well, Chairperson, you will also agree that the issues that arose around which there were many reports and complaints and, in fact, a lot of noise in the fifth term were scattered in different portfolios that are already allocated to departments and ministries. And therefore, the fact that part of the narrative would be referring to a role or other of the president does not, for me, necessarily make the case for a portfolio committee over the president. It is the issues that must be looked at. And as Parliament actually, in fact, provides for, when there is no specific portfolio committee, and maybe the matters are all over the place, we create an ad hoc committee. Those are the times we create ad hoc committees, and we take members that are sitting in different portfolio committees to the extent that they would be relevant, and their insights and their exposure and knowledge would be relevant. They will be brought together in an ad hoc committee to deal with those matters. And that's what was done whenever it was necessary during the 5th term.
Well, Ms. Mbete, you would be aware that this commission has heard quite a bit of evidence on this very topic. And the evidence shows that a proposal debated on the floor of the National Assembly in September of 2016 for an ad hoc committee to investigate allegations of state capture was roundly defeated by the African National Congress MPs. Doesn't that indicate precisely the opposite of what you just said, namely that Parliament didn't use the ad hoc committee structure, which was available to it, in circumstances when there was a need to do so?
Now, the subject of ad hoc committees was very often a reason to have disagreement. In particular, when some members of Parliament would be arguing for an ad hoc committee, and in our view, we who run Parliament, and I'm talking about not just the presiding officers, but the management, without whom we can't actually play our role, including the legal department and the administration of Parliament. And in each house, there's a secretary who has other managers under them. We would always examine the case that would be argued, in particular, or very often from the opposition benches, for an ad hoc committee, as if you just create ad hoc committees just for the sake of it. Every portfolio in government has a portfolio committee that corresponds with it. When in the rare occasion there's a necessity to bring people from different portfolio committees and create an ad hoc committee, even in the 5th Parliament, as the affidavit lays out, we created ad hoc committees. But you don't just create an ad hoc committee because somebody has thought of it and they think it's the best way. Why can we not use an existing portfolio committee is the first question we would ask ourselves. And only when we are convinced that no one portfolio committee is able to take on whatever it is that needs to be looked into, only then do we go for the ad hoc committee and we take people from different portfolios. Because, Chairperson, taking people away from their portfolio committees adds to the volume of work that MPs have. And Chairperson, I want to tell South Africa, members of Parliament work very hard. Members of Parliament have a lot to do. The 12 months in a year is not an easy time. It's got to be divided into bits and pieces because they've got to dash to that corner of the country to do constituency work. They've got to go and do political work. They've got to go and do oversight work. Not all the time, not all the year is oversight. In fact, I think there's somewhere where I'm pointing out that in the current term, only 11 weeks are set aside. And once that program, because remember, the program is not decided by one person. We all in a committee that is in fact a committee of all parties, a multi-party committee, meets every Thursday to discuss the program of Parliament. So where you must take time away from what already is in the program is not an easy decision to make. But now and again, it becomes an easy ball in the politics, of course, which are always part and parcel of the environment that Parliament has to conduct its business in.
Can I take you back to the question that Mr. Freund asked about a portfolio committee that would be dedicated to performing oversight over the president or presidency? Is part of your answer this, that when one has regard to the fact that the president would have divided his hair, because we are not talking about a particular,
never know.
his or her executive authority among various ministers' portfolios, when you take that into account, which means that any issues that relate to those portfolios would go to the particular portfolio committees. When you take that into account, plus the fact that Parliament has the power and opportunity of establishing an ad hoc committee when an issue has arisen that doesn't fall under any of the portfolio committees or that cannot be dealt with by any one of the committees, is part of your evidence that that should take care of any situation that might arise where there is a need for oversight or for certain issues to be looked into relating to a president?
In fact, Chairperson, my evidence is so far, having worked in that environment, I know that if anything arises for which we don't have a specific structure, we would form the necessary structure, make it an ad hoc committee, because it's a matter for which there isn't a permanent structure. But you give it and you use the necessary human resources that are around you, and you get it to, you agree the terms of reference. And those terms of reference would be agreed to in a multi-party structure. So the chances of blaming one party for or being protective or something of the president, no. You agree a structure and you get it to have all the resources that it needs, and you get it to look at the specific issues that are the problem. And after that, you let the MPs go back to their other jobs, which are the various portfolio committees, because every MP would belong to at least 2 portfolio committees. Now, if you look at the volume of work in front of each portfolio committee, for each MP to get on top of the subject of the portfolio they are working in is a very difficult job. And therefore, you know, you really want to give them the chance to master the portfolio in which they must be more, you know, have insights more in that particular portfolio or 2.
Of course, a challenge with regard to creating an ad hoc committee or a committee, an ad hoc committee, to look into certain issues that may have arisen at a particular time in relation to a particular president. A particular challenge that might arise would be if the majority party doesn't even want that committee to be established, because that committee can only be established if the majority party goes along. That you would accept.
That's not a major problem in Parliament, actually. This issue of, you know, I hear a lot of noises being made here in this commission, especially by honorable members in the opposition benches. There is no issue that is not canvassed, that is not processed by the whips in Parliament. And it is among the whips, if you want to really process something to a level where there is what we used to call sufficient consensus. The Whippery are really the engine, because it's a multi-party body. If for some reason there's a convincing argument being made, in fact, the chief whip is going to be able to think about it and discuss it and even bring it forward to other colleagues, including in the majority party. So it's not impossible for things, because they were not originating from the majority party, to be agreed upon. If in fact there's a good reason and they are argued, they are put on the table, people look at the issues and they tend to agree, to convince each other across the political parties.
So you say the difficulty, if there is any in that regard, is not as big as it might seem, but, or you say there is no difficulty at all?
I'm saying it's not difficult. You know, Chairperson, we each have our own little moments where there's a pain you suffered and it never goes away. And therefore, wherever you go and you tell the story of your term or your time in Parliament, it is that particular little pain. And yet, actually, it was not like it was bringing the whole country down. Yes, proposals were made by MPs to make ad hoc committees, to create ad hoc committees. They were looked at. Nothing was ever dismissed, just out of hand. We would take those proposals and turn them around. As I say, we would use, of course, the insights of the committee section, both the House chairperson, the relevant House chairperson, as well as the management, the senior management in that particular section, the committee section, to look at the viability of the proposal of an ad hoc committee. There's no magic in an ad hoc committee. An ad hoc committee is a group of MPs brought together. So you'll take them away from somewhere else where they are doing work that they are actually focused on. And my point is, only when it's absolutely unavoidable must you take people away from their jobs, for which they hardly have enough time, enough energy, enough resources, you know, because these are the challenges of being an MP. We go to other countries and we see how an MP is supported by 10 different people. Just one MP. He has a lawyer to himself, a researcher, you know, an administrator, and you say, wow, our MPs work hard, Chairperson. If I say nothing else to convince you, let me convince you on that one thing. Our members of Parliament work very hard.
Yeah. Mr. Freund?
Thank you. Ms. Mbete, there's been overwhelming evidence before this commission that by no later than March of 2016, and in fact one can make a compelling case for a lot earlier than that, by no later than March 2016, there was enormous public concern about allegations of corruption and state capture. And not one portfolio committee saw fit to adhere to requests to investigate those allegations. Does that not negate the evidence you've just given?
What I'm saying, Chairperson, is in March 2016, MPs were very busy. What exactly they were doing, each of them, I won't be able to say here. But it cannot be argued that they were sitting around, they had all the time and the consciousness and the awareness and the understanding of everything about what was going on. And they didn't do anything about it. There came a time at a certain point, Chairperson, when in fact those issues, because you are right, in 2016, suddenly we were hearing noises and we were reading and seeing that there are disturbing reports about things that were happening, about which we were hearing rumors, no concrete information or understanding. And because at that time, when individual public representatives are hearing these matters, they are not just sitting around idling. I'm trying to just point that out. So when you say they did not respond, they did not go and do oversight, maybe sitting in this point where we are, with a lot of hindsight, we are stronger. We, in fact, are better off than where those MPs were in that moment, in that year. So, at a certain point later, of course, things will come directly to them through reports to their specific portfolio committees, documents that that come to them and they have to pay attention to. And yes, some of those matters started receiving attention, portfolio committee by portfolio committee, a few portfolios. But what I'm correcting, Chairperson, is a tone that seeks to suggest that when MPs had all the knowledge and they had all the power given by legislation and the Constitution, they didn't do anything when they understood. Probably they did not understand as much as we do now.
I think probably Mr. Freund will have quite a few follow-up questions on that. Mr. Freund?
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mbete, this is not a matter of the benefit of 2020 hindsight. These were matters that the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress itself, by March of 2016, regarded as of the utmost gravity. The suggestion that MPs could not be faulted for not having the same insight doesn't bear scrutiny. And what also does not bear scrutiny, I want to put to you, is the failure of members of parliament, and particularly the portfolio committees, let's leave aside ad hoc committees, to investigate these allegations which were widely publicized by no later than March of 2016.
Chairperson, I know that testimony has been put before you also about certain information that came to the attention of the structure of the African National Congress, a National Executive Committee that Mr. Freund refers to. I'm also aware that the Speaker herself, when she was here, did raise the concern that you don't just take something because someone has said it and you plunge it into the space of Parliament. And I want, Chairperson, to tell you an occasion when, at that time, it was my first term as the Deputy Speaker, and the Speaker was away, so I was the acting Speaker. When a document was slid under my door, and as it turned out when I read it, it was about the arms deal, the famous arms deal. Yesterday, the case was again postponed and so on. That document had no signature, had no author, But yes, it was containing scary things that were being claimed in this document. I had to apply my mind for hours, and I took a decision. Parliament is very busy. We never have enough time. And I must now take this dramatic document, yes, and say Parliament must take this into its program. On what basis? Who's the author? And I just did not act on it. And I'm saying this, and if another opportunity like that happened, I would still decide that. I'm not going to take this document, which in fact is a lot of rumor, drama, very concerning, but it must have an author. Why is there no author? The person who has slid it under my door must come out, must face me and tell me they are concerned about this and that's why they are bringing it to me. Then I will act on it. So the fact that someone tells us something does not put it in the kind of shape that, as a responsible person running this very complicated, complex space, must take it and say, in addition to every other headache we have, here's something else, find a way, maybe create an ad hoc committee. So I'm trying to therefore answer Mr. Freund by saying, the fact that the NEC was told something, in fact, just gave it the status of a rumor.
Well, I don't think that anybody suggests that anything that comes to the attention of members of Parliament, irrespective of its status or quality, must be a ground for a member of Parliament or members of Parliament to start doing something. I think nobody suggests that, because otherwise Parliament would never do its work, because there are so many of those things. Okay. But at the same time, I think you would also agree that probably Parliament shouldn't wait until there is the kind of evidence that maybe would be expected in a court of law before it does something. So probably, as I see it, I think the differences of opinion may well be at what stage should Parliament, at what stage did Parliament have enough to be able to say, well, some investigation should be done. We don't have something that is certain, but what we have is enough to justify that we investigate. I think that's where most of the people would be. They might differ about, in 2012, was there enough? Maybe no. In 2013, 2014, maybe yes, maybe no. But I think some of the MPs have said in 2017, when the portfolio committee to look into ESCOM and so on was established, at that stage they thought there was enough. But there may be people who say there was enough much earlier. So what do you say to that approach? To say, nobody says take everything that gets slid under your door and run with it, but also nobody says wait until you have the kind of evidence that will be accepted in a court of law before you investigate, because if you wait until then, probably there is no need to investigate. Somewhere in between there should be a time when Parliament should say, well, there's enough to investigate. What would you say to that?
I say, Chairperson, you are correct. And in fact, members of portfolio committees did take initiatives and started themselves, without being prompted, to look into what they had been picking up, which were of concern to them. And yes, there were tensions because, you know, invariably, remember, when you are in Parliament, you continue to be yourself, the individual MP, who must use your integrity to think through things, interact with your colleagues within the parliamentary system, listen to differences from other parties, people coming from different perspectives. But also, there's always a political environment surrounding everybody. And that goes not just for the people from the ruling party, it also goes for every other member of parliament from every political party. So, yes, there would be those moments. For instance, the portfolio committee on public enterprises decided for themselves that they wanted to look into the issues of ESCOM. And worked very hard on that issue. By the time the noise increases, and in fact there's the Gupta leaks and all of these things all over the place, indeed, they were already on the way, having decided for themselves that they are going to do this work. Because also, people have different strengths. While others will be more easily frightened to think about, if we do this, what happens to us? Others are actually strengthened by the very fact that there's something that looks smelly here, and I think we should pursue it. Most people, I want to say, that I was aware of were the type that would not hesitate to pursue things just because, you know, of political considerations, for instance. But that's a factor, because Parliament is a political environment.
Mr. Freund?
Thank you. You said that some people might be frightened. Can I ask you, frightened of what?
Of whatever fears they might have for themselves, for political careers, you know, because that's always a consideration in a parliamentary setup. Because remember, you are not elected by people, you are elected by the party. You come there on that strength. And that's not like the worst thing that can happen to you in the world, Mr. Freund.
I'm not suggesting it is. That it's a great public privilege and onerous responsibility to be a member of Parliament. And of course, you're quite correct that nobody goes to Parliament, as things stand, without going there on a ticket of a political party. Ms. Mbete, can I take you to paragraph 27 of your affidavit, please?
27.
You will see that that deals with what we refer to in this commission as the Frolic Letters of June 2017. Yes. I'm sure you will recall that period. Can I ask you what role you played personally in relation to the letters that were sent by Mr. Frolic to the chairs of 4 portfolio committees at that time?
What role I personally played? I actually won't lie to say to you I remember crisply. But by the time this was happening, this is the time of the Gupta leaks.
That's correct.
So we would have been talking, I mean, Mr. Frolick himself, we would have been talking as presiding officers. We would have also been talking in the political committee, which is a structure that exists, which we form each time after, a parliament has been formed, in order to enable those members, in particular of the majority party, that are in the leadership, to be able to come together as quickly as possible to share information, clarify matters to themselves as a collective, and therefore enable each one of us go back to your office with better understanding, having benefited from the collective wisdom. So we would have probably also gone through that, I imagine, probably in the political committee already. And we would have probably called Mr. Frolick to come in specifically, even if he would not have been a member of the political committee himself, but for the specific reason of being able to collectively look at the issues that were facing the whole country. We would have called him in to find out what information, what insights he, as the House chairperson concerned, he could share and shed light on, so that we could then collectively reach a particular understanding to enable the chief whip to go back to his role as chief whip and having benefited from that collective wisdom. And Frolick and I, because Frolick would have worked in under myself, would then have a further discussion talking more in detail about what he knew, what he understood. But as I say, I cannot claim to you that I remember crisply what exactly was the detail of what happened at that time. But I remember these discussions and the mood of the time.
Is it fair to say that you believe that this decision to facilitate portfolio committees becoming more active in relation to these specific allegations of state capture and corruption would have been preceded by some discussion in the political committee?
I suspect so. Because it is exactly this kind of moment that would have been a very difficult moment in the country generally, that your leadership must be ready to come together quickly, share information, and therefore empower themselves collectively to be able to get back to their leadership roles in the different offices that they were playing a role in, and therefore be able to lead with better understanding. For instance, if I may make an example of how it would be helpful, the questions of where else some of these matters were receiving attention would have been an important issue. Because as we in Parliament were thinking, where must there be an inquiry that must be encouraged? If it hasn't started, we must actually ensure that it starts. We would be interested to know whether the security, in the security cluster, there are any investigations going on. Because we would always, especially we in Parliament, resources are a big issue, big area of consideration. So we would think there's no point in asking us or people here to start some investigation when in fact there's an investigation happening somewhere else. Because remember, the national fiscus, we all draw from the same national fiscus. So there's no need in having to have a number of investigations on the same thing if you can avoid it.
Can I ask you please to explain to the Commission the different roles played by the ANC's political committee by contrast to the strategy committee?
The strategy committee was actually the chief whip's space. The chief whips over the years, I've always known, would always create this little space depending on what was on the agenda at the time. For instance, what debates are happening at that time. Maybe we're going through budget votes. So all those that come from the ANC would be invited to come there just to get a sense of strategy and who's dealing with what. And then you go and do what you are supposed to be talking or focusing on.
Can I take you back to your answer immediately before this one, where you were saying the question of who else may have been investigating certain allegations would have been an important issue when Parliament would have had to consider whether it itself should investigate those allegations. Now, obviously, one can see that that's a legitimate issue to consider because of the limited resources that you are talking about, because there would be, Parliament would be alive to the need to avoid duplication of costs and resources and so on. But at the same time, if you take, for example, an investigation that is being done, say, by the Hawks or the police, which they do for a particular purpose, namely crime, it might take years. So Parliament might be needing to understand why certain things are happening and what should be done by Parliament to try and arrest the situation. And if they were to wait for the police to complete their investigations, it might take long. So the question that I would like to ask is whether you would say the position is that Parliament must just make a judgment call based on the situation at the time. They must make the decision whether to investigate. It can't be a situation where they say all the time, as long as the police are investigating, we won't investigate. It would always depend on the issues and all relevant factors. There may be cases where even if the police are investigating, Parliament, because of its constitutional obligation and its desire to understand how certain things are happening, might decide nevertheless that it would investigate. Would that be something you would go along with?
Yes, Chairperson.
Yes.
That is exactly the point. Parliament would have to look at the kind of investigation that in fact can be done by Parliament, because Parliament is not the police. Mm. There are just things it will not be able to do because it's not designed that way. It is not about getting into that kind of detail of investigation like a forensic investigation. In fact, we send things of that nature to relevant structures in the security cluster. But where there is some work happening elsewhere that we are conscious of, we would look at it and see whether we really think we should get into it or we should wait. There also came a time when I think it was in 2016 that we decided that it was time to look at this matter of this commission. And that discussion started before 2017. And we were convinced that we needed to have such a commission that would also be able to be given the kinds of resources it needs to get to the bottom of what is it that has been going wrong all over the place. And so I'm elated that we are here.
Thank you. Mr. Freund?
Yes, thank you. I just want to go back to the political committee and the strategy committee. I understand, please just confirm, that you would have been a member of the political committee.
I was a member of the political committee because I am a member of the NEC. So
yeah.
The political committee would be formed out of the leadership that would be in Parliament.
Yes. The strategy committee, the ANC strategy committee, you as speaker, would you have attended meetings of that committee?
No.
No.
I would attend maybe once when I'm part of a debate,
yes, but not ordinarily.
And it's just, but it was not a place I went to. I mean, I didn't even go to caucus regularly. I went from time to time. So strategy committee, no.
And meetings of the Chief Whips Forum, would you typically attend those meetings?
No.
No.
No, not unless I was invited, because there was a particular matter the Chief Whips needed the speaker to clarify and so on.
Now, so the late Jackson Mtembu has furnished an affidavit, but of course we've not had the opportunity, regrettably, to ask him some questions arising. But in relation to this, what we call the Frolic letters, he says that this was
in
discussed
relation to, sorry, I didn't hear that.
To the letters sent by Frolic.
Okay, the Frolic letters.
I'm in June of 2017. And he says in relation to those letters that the proposal that the portfolio committees, or that there should be investigation by portfolio committees, was discussed at the ANC Strategy Committee meeting and at the Chief Whips Forum meeting. And he doesn't refer to any discussions involving Mr. Frolic. But Mr. Frolic's evidence was as follows: that on that particular day, the 15th of June 2007, he was away. He was not at Parliament for an understandable reason. But on his return, he was called to a meeting with yourself and with Mr. Mtembu, and there was a discussion which in due course resulted in him sending these letters. So what I'm trying to piece together is what happened here factually in sort of chronological sequence. You've said that on the probabilities, this would have been discussed in the political committee. Would it be reasonable to assume that the strategy committee would have taken direction from the political committee?
The strategy committee's leader would have been the Chief Whip. The Chief Whip was a member of the political committee.
Yes.
Because he was a leader. So he was part of the leadership collective that gave political leadership whenever it was necessary. As I say, what each person, depending on the role they had been deployed to, the Chief Whip is a Chief Whip, so he will sit with the other leaders. They have a discussion of what was obtaining. They would share perspectives, and then they let go and they go and do their own job. Each one would do their own job. So the Chief Whip might have already shared his thinking with some of the whips under him, but I don't know. So I can't quite say to you, first there was a political committee or not. It might even have been the other way around. He might have come to the political committee already having tested his thoughts, or these are human interactions. So,
understand that.
we should see a parliamentary setting as a setting where here are human beings who have come from various corners of the country. They've come very seriously to play a role to service the needs of our people. So he's a chief whip, this one is a speaker, that one is the other thing. Others are ministers. There are many more of them who are together there in being ministers and as part of the executive. So we play leadership roles there in those corners separately. We don't have to be instructed on the detail of how do you execute your leadership function in your own corner. No, we don't. I mean, we read that we are expected to be getting calls from Luthuli House. No, there's nothing like that. Nothing could be more ridiculous than that. Who in Luthuli House has even an understanding of how Parliament runs? So you take advantage of the collective to come together as the political committee, share your understanding, get information, then you get to know, okay, so someone else is doing something else about this same matter we're busy grappling with here in this environment. So how then do we take it forward? So I hope I'm answering you, I'm clarifying your question, Mr. Freund.
Thank you.
If not, please say so, I'll try again.
Thank you. The Chief Whips Forum, is that a forum that involves whips other than ANC whips?
Yes. It's a multi-party forum.
It's a multi-party structure.
Multi-party.
Whereas the Strategy Committee and the Political Committee are African National Congress.
Yes, it would be the ANC people.
Right. Now, I want to go back to the 15th of June, 2017, because what Mr. Froelich says, and I just want to see whether you agree or disagree with what he says. He says that when he returned, he was called to a meeting with you and Mr. Ntembu, and there was some discussion between the three of you about the proposal that had been raised by opposition MPs, that now was the time for an ad hoc committee to be established. And he says the three of you agreed that it was not time for that, but it was indeed time to call upon the relevant portfolio committees to themselves investigate these allegations that were now very widely circulated. Do you agree with Mr. Froelich's evidence on that?
That we put our heads together, the three of us, that makes sense. We probably had to do that quite often at certain periods that Parliament would have been going through. But that we said, I don't know the detail of, we said it's not time for ad hoc committee and so on. I wouldn't remember that kind of detail.
Well, these details are extremely important. That's why I'm spending some time talking to you about them. And what he says is, you personally, Mr. Ntembu, and him agreed that it would be best for the portfolio committees to investigate and then to report back to the House. And that you then asked Mr. Froelich to then write to the portfolio committee chairs concerned to give effect to that. Do you dispute that? Do you have anything?
No, if you put it that way, Mr. Freund, Chairperson, earlier on, I said to you, there are portfolio committees. And what makes sense to anyone running Parliament, as I was, is for things to go to the relevant space where they are every day having the people who are focused on them. Why create an ad hoc committee that pulls people from elsewhere? Let the portfolio committees concerned deal with the issues. That would have made sense.
So is the position, or would it be fair to say, you are saying that you can't remember whether there was such a meeting and that in that meeting there was a decision that creating an ad hoc committee was not the right thing to do, but that the matter could go to the relevant committees is something that's consistent with what you would have wanted to do.
Correct, Chairperson.
Yes, okay.
It comes more naturally.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
Mr. Mbete, let me make clear that I'm not particularly concerned about whether such investigative process, such inquiries should take place in a portfolio committee or in an ad hoc committee. I'm not focusing on that at all for the moment. What I'm much more interested in is the principle that you seem to be accepting, and that is the principle that it's perfectly appropriate and to be expected that you as Speaker and the Chief Whip, in consultation with the Chair of Chairs, would take a decision to instruct that portfolio committees should now investigate these allegations. Do you accept that?
I'm not quite sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, you might have to repeat your question. I think the first
Because
part,
the thing you have said...
the first part was not so clear.
Because I understand, Mr. Freund, the facts as you have put them, but I'm just trying to figure out where is the problem area in what you are saying, because we are talking about our job in Parliament, and we share this kind of information all the time on an ongoing basis.
I think let him repeat the question so we understand. Yes, Mr. Freund?
Let me come at the same question from a different direction. There is, to my knowledge, nothing in the preceding 5 years remotely comparable to the 4 letters sent by Mr. Froelich to the 4 chairs of portfolio committees. Letters from the Chair of Chairs, ostensibly on behalf of the Speaker and with the authority of the Speaker, directing that particular portfolio committees should investigate particular allegations. I want to check firstly that you agree that that is what happened, that you were party to a decision to issue such an instruction via Mr. Froelich that there should now be these types of investigations.
Chairperson, I'm saying I have no specific memory.
Yes.
But I am saying,
Yeah.
if it happened, in fact, I embrace it.
Yes.
And it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Because that moment was a moment of great concern and noise and a lot of agitation and scary news in the public domain. And as individual leaders and collectively, whenever we had an opportunity, we would put our heads together to say, what is going on?
So your response is you don't have a specific recollection of the meeting, but bearing in mind what the atmosphere was around that time, you would think it would be the right thing to do that the relevant committees be asked to do investigations. Is that right?
Actually, Chairperson, Mr. Froelich would not have needed to mention that he had a discussion with the Speaker. He would have been playing a role that made sense that he should do that. He should give that leadership because that was part of his portfolio as the House Chairperson relevant in relation to the work of committees.
Okay, Mr. Freund?
It would be part of Mr. Froelich's duties, as you understand them, when there was scary noise in the public domain, to request relevant portfolio committees to investigate the allegations.
Yes, Mr. Freund. Yes, Mr. Chairperson.
Now, when you referred a moment ago, I just want to check for the purposes of the record, that you said at that time there was scary noise in the public domain. Did you have in mind when you said that the allegations in and relating to the so-called Gupta leaks emails?
That would have been part of it.
What else in addition?
I don't know, Mr. Freund. I can't, unless I read through somewhere where I read specific reports.
Yes.
But the many wrongdoings that we unearthed in the Public Enterprises Portfolio Committee that came out as the ESCOM inquiries were underway in Parliament, the things that were happening at the SABC also, which the portfolio committee concerned had gotten into even earlier than the others that were dealing with the Gupta leaks. So the amounts of monies that had been looted, you know, those are the things that I find scary even today.
Yes. Now, the problem, of course, as you, I believe, understand, is that those allegations were not made for the first time in June of 2017. In fact, allegations were made, for example, by a deputy minister in March of 2016, that he had been offered a very substantial bribe if he would assume the office of finance minister and then do the bidding of the Guptas from whom he says he received this offer. That is just one example of the scary noise in the public domain, not in June 2017, but in March of 2016. Do you agree that that was deeply disturbing? And if you do agree, can you explain why you would not, together with the Chief Whip and Mr. Froelich, as early as March of 2016, have directed inquiries of the type that were only directed in June of 2017?
Because there's logic in how an institution like Parliament does its very complex job. It would not just go clutching at information that arrives, as I told you earlier on. Even when I found a document under my door, I decided, and that was very early on, in the first Parliament actually, that I am not going to act on this because it has no author, it has no face. It can't be the basis on which I just drag this thing and bring it here. But by the time you are referring to, Mr. Freund, Chairperson, by that time, I think there was enough to make even a person who was so fast asleep to wake up and realize that, no, there's something very, very wrong. But even as that was being attended to, it couldn't just be a question of, I've heard this now, I'm dashing to go and instruct. There's a process, there's a program, there are structures, and therefore, although right now, this very minute, I might not be able to answer you in terms of the detail of that specific question that you are asking, I know that it would be a matter that would have been looked at not only by the opposition, by all MPs in the relevant spaces where that information was affecting them. Whether they did act or not is a matter of detail, and I would have to go and find the detail.
The time,
sorry, Judge.
I'm sorry, Mr. Freund. The time that you refer to, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I think you said something along the lines that even someone who was sleeping would have become aware by that time that something needed to be done because of what was in the public domain. Is that in 2016, around the time when Mr. Jonas made the revelations about the Gupta offer.
I remember the report of Mr. Jonas,
Yeah.
but by that time also, there would have been a lot of public mobilization.
Yes, yes,
So it was not only in Parliament
yes,
or in the NEC of the ANC. By that time, I think people were mobilizing in the streets. You know, I was going through this, talking to colleagues, saying, you know, it was the first time I saw white people toy-toying in the streets. You know, so there was the unprecedented level of public mobilization simply around the issue of discoveries of wrongdoing, including misuse of money.
yes. So as I understand you, you are saying it's not just when Mr. Jonas made the revelation, even before that. As far as you are concerned, the stage has been reached where there was mobilization in the public domain. Yes. Okay. Of course, a few years earlier, that is earlier than the revelation of Mr. Jonas, in 2013, there had been the waterproof landing of the Gupta aeroplane, which also seems to have caught the attention of many people in the country.
It got my attention, but at that time, I was out of Parliament for that term.
Oh, for that term.
For that
yes.
term, I was in Whippery
Yes.
House, and
Yes.
it hit me,
Yes,
even
Yeah.
that time,
Yeah.
that particular incident.
yes. Okay, Mr. Florent?
Now, that time of great public protest, it's a matter of record, there's a lot of evidence on it, but it commences long before June of 2017. And the allegations that were being made very publicly were really allegations of subversion of our entire constitution, of improper influence over the highest levels of office, both at the level of the presidency, at the level of the cabinet, at the level of director generals, at the level of chairs of state-owned entities, at the level of executive state-owned entities. And Parliament was under an obligation to hold the executive to account, to oversee the executive and hold the executive to account. Can you explain why that simply did not happen through the portfolio committees or through an ad hoc committee at all in 2016?
I would have to go back to my submission to read about the specific question you are asking me now of 2016. But all I am saying, Chairperson, is that we did what is contained in this submission. The record is here of that which was done, whether it was by way of questions to the President, questions to specific ministers. That's apart from the portfolio committees. That is apart from the motions of no confidence. So it is simply untrue to say the Fifth Parliament sat through massive amounts of corruption and did totally nothing. It is not true. What did happen is here. Might be inadequate, and yes, I dare say actually it was inadequate because the resources are not adequate. The capabilities, even as the other testimonies have been put before the chairperson, and we hope the chairperson will highlight that matter. The capability, the resources need attention.
And may I make clear, Ms. Mbete, that I, for one, take no issue with the facts that you set out in your affidavit as to things that did happen. But I'm focusing particularly on portfolio committees as engines for ferreting out the truth and bringing about accountability for the very same reason that you emphasized that right at the outset of your presentation this afternoon, when you said that's the engine room of oversight. And I want to put to you, for a last time, because I think we have covered this material, that it's at that level that the failure really took place, the failure of investigation, inquiry, and holding the executive to account in relation to allegations that had ostensible credibility and were extremely serious.
Chairperson, I do not deny that there were failures. That's not my point. But I'm saying a lot more could have been done. If, for instance, the fortunate place where we are now, where we have put a lot of research and investigative powers, we've put a lot of resources, precisely as we had thought originally it would work. It is good that we now know what we know, so that we know how to correct it. That it went wrong, yes, it went wrong. It's true.
All right, so let's now, from my side, try to be more constructive. I want to focus on some of the issues which you highlight in your affidavit. First, if I can take you to paragraph 20 of your affidavit.
Did you say paragraph 20?
Paragraph 20, it's at page 988. I think this may have been the paragraph you had in mind, Ms. Mbete, when you referred quite some time ago to portfolio committees sitting for 11 weeks a year. In fact, what you said here is 10.5 weeks a year. Now, I have no reason to dispute that what you say is correct, but it does strike me as a matter of concern. If one of the core functions of Parliament is to hold the executive accountable, if it is correct that only 10.5 weeks of a year the portfolio committees engage in this type of activity, is that not a matter in itself that should be of concern to us?
We hope so. That's why it's a good thing that it is here. It's before the whole of South Africa, so that we know what's going on in our institutions, and we can therefore understand when cases are being made about what must change and what needs to be put into creating better capacity for this institution to work better.
Now, a second factor that you have highlighted, and it has been highlighted by other witnesses, is the question of budget. Budget for Parliament, and in particular, budget for portfolio committees. But I'm a little puzzled, and you could assist to educate me, when the Speaker of Parliament complains that the resources available to Parliament for it to carry out its functions are dictated by the executive. It had always been my impression that the executive needed to come to Parliament for its budget to be approved. In other words, that the ultimate decision maker is Parliament and not the executive. Do I misunderstand the situation?
No, you don't, Mr. Freund, you don't. But it's a complex relationship. It's a complex process, working relationship, how the whole thing starts, who determines amounts. But it's a matter that we are proposing, needs attention. In particular, in my introductory note, additional document, I'm actually reminding us that in the 4th term, when I was out in the head office of the ANC, the president and the other heads of other institutions started to have this discussion about what was not right, but they did not complete it. And it's correct to say the budget of the executive even comes to Parliament so that it goes to the relevant committees, it receives the necessary detailed attention, and then it comes to the House and it gets adopted and all of that. But the actual reality is, at the beginning of the process of getting to decide how and the quantum of what is procured by Parliament for itself, for its own work as an arm, and the other, the judiciary, is not satisfactory. But I'm just introducing a matter that I think needs a lot more detailed attention.
I think it's an important issue because because Parliament's constitutional obligations in regard to oversight and holding the executive accountable is very important for the country. It's very important, and yet if it doesn't have resources, it can't really do its work properly. Obviously, we all know that resources are limited, and it's always difficult to reach a point where you say, I've got adequate resources. But from what I have been hearing, it looks like there is a lot of improvement in terms of Parliament, in terms of resources. Yes, Mr. Freund.
Now, Ms. Mbete, I was being quite straight with you when I asked you to help to educate me on this question of parliamentary oversight in respect to the budget, because it seems to me, the very little I've looked at this afternoon, which I've looked at only in response to what you just submitted to us, that the situation is far from simple. And that I have just downloaded off the Parliamentary Budget Office website a document that explains how the budget operates and the whole budgeting process and so forth. But right at the end of it, it says this, under the heading Amendment Powers. The budget bills are money bills, ones which appropriate money or impose taxes, levies or duties. Although the Constitution says an act must be passed to allow Parliament to amend money bills, this has not yet been done. At present, Parliament can only either accept the bill as it is or reject it entirely. So my first question to you arising from that is whether, as far as you know, that is correct and remains the situation right now.
I think that question should have gone to the Speaker. Maybe I'm not the right person for me to answer that question at this moment.
You're not sure?
But when you left in 2019, was that the position?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it probably hasn't changed. But we can check. Okay, all right, Mr. Freund.
And does that mean, Ms. Mbete, that although Parliament may take the view that what is proposed by the Minister of Finance when he introduces a budget as being the allocation for Parliament is in its view insufficient? And for present purposes, I'm focusing specifically on insufficient to enable it to perform its oversight functions.
It's always...
Is the situation, as you understand it, that Parliament can do nothing about it, can either accept the budget or reject the budget, but otherwise has no power to determine or influence?
It's not that we can't do anything. We could use the money bills space that exists, but we make the choice for stability.
I see. So you are saying, as I hear you, that Parliament has acted consciously not to rock the boat and has accepted the consequences of that.
No, we've raised the issues We've had interactions. In fact, at a certain point, we took the issues up as the Speakers Forum. In other words, the forum that includes the speakers of all legislatures from around the country, because they are even in a worse situation because they relate to their MECs of finance. And invariably, the relationships there are very tricky. And so we took the issues up with the then Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, at the time, to initiate this engagement, to say, you know that this relationship doesn't work okay. In other words, we were looking at it from a political point of view, saying, let's first put the issues on the table, just peacefully, to explain to one another where we're each coming from, how this situation affects us adversely. And in fact, when he left, we continued with Minister Gigaba. So the whole legislative sector were seized with the matter when I left. We had started discussions even with the current president.
I guess that it may be that Parliament and the provincial legislatures, but it's more convenient to talk about Parliament. Parliament maybe hasn't, I want to say, asserted its authority enough. Maybe that's not the right wording. But from what you say, it seems to me that it's a question of when Parliament wants to draw the line and say, we have had enough peaceful discussions now. They have not led us anywhere. So would you agree that it's a question of when Parliament would decide now the discussions, the peaceful discussions have not achieved anything and we can't allow this situation to go on forever. Therefore, we will now take stronger action.
Thank you, Chairperson, for asking a question I can't answer.
But you might not be able to answer now, but during your term,
yes,
you had the same problem. Do you not agree that what I'm saying would have applied during your
yes,
term? Yeah.
As I say, we had taken it up as a sector.
Yeah.
And even started to engage the head of state at that time.
Okay, all right. Mr. Freud?
Can I change the subject, please? Can I refer you to paragraph 22 of your affidavit?
Paragraph 22 is at page 989.
You refer there to the following. You say it can be appreciated that a much harmonized and agile security environment would serve as an early warning sign regarding covert operations, such as we have come to know about a subject like state capture. I'd like to ask you a few questions arising from that. There is an Act of Parliament that creates the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence, and which requires that committee to report annually to Parliament in relation to its oversight functions over the intelligence agencies. I presume you're aware of that. Is that correct?
Correct, Chairperson.
I'll refer to that committee as the JSCI. Is it correct that while you were Speaker, for 2 or 3 years, it's not clear to me which it is, that committee failed to report at all to Parliament?
I'm aware of that, Chairperson.
Yes. Okay.
Can you tell us what you know about that?
There's not much I can tell you, Chairperson, except that indeed
It happened.
it happened.
Well,
And
were
you know
aware-
that it's an area that tends to work behind the scenes, really.
In secrecy.
And therefore we get it deeply embedded in our heads to accept that you don't go out of your way to be probing because it might even be misunderstood.
But Ms. Mbete, you were the speaker, and if I understand you correctly, you were telling the chair that you were aware the JSCI had failed in its legal duty, which was a duty to Parliament, which you led. Is that correct?
Chairperson, I do not claim to have a lot of recollection specifically about the JSCI. I know that in the 5th term, there had started to be questions about the reports that were due to the JSCI, but were not coming.
Were due from or by,
From
to Parliament?
to the JSCI, which is a committee of Parliament.
Yes.
Yes. So, because it's an area that is generally remote in its nature, and which in fact has arrangements that are such that we've never had to be probing into that particular corner of things. So I was aware at that time, very vaguely, that there seemed to be disquiet about something that had changed where the reports were supposed to be arriving from into Parliament.
So, but Mr. Freund was speaking about reports that were supposed to be given to Parliament by this particular committee.
The JSCI.
Yes, yes.
In
Are you talking
order-
about the same thing?
I'm talking about the same thing.
Okay.
In order for the JSCI
Yes.
to do anything, it needs to receive
Reports from
Reports.
somewhere else.
from
And
somewhere.
That's where you
That's
understood
where there seemed to
there
be
were issues.
issues.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, even if that were correct, it wouldn't make the situation acceptable, would it, from the perspective of
Of
Parliament?
course not. Can't.
Now, the problem is even deeper, because were you aware that for a period of 2 years, Parliament failed to discharge its legal obligation to appoint an Inspector General of Intelligence?
I'm aware, Chairperson.
Well, could you explain to us how that could be permitted to happen?
I think with a lot of these situations we're dealing with, it's not a matter of things being allowed to happen. They simply just don't happen, or they happen the way they happen. And what we have since now been faced with is the revelations that did come out at a certain point during the 5th term, and today, piece by piece, we're trying to unravel exactly what the true nature of those matters was.
Would you accept, Ms. Mbete, that as Speaker, you bore a personal responsibility to ensure that Parliament addressed 2 issues? The first was the failure of the JSCI to report to Parliament, and the second was the obligation of Parliament to appoint an Inspector General of Intelligence.
Chairperson, I didn't hear what, I heard the last part, but I didn't quite connect it to the first part of the sentence.
He said personal responsibility, I think he said. He said, would you accept, or maybe repeat it, Mr. Freund?
Chair, you're correct, but what I'm really focusing on here, Ms. Mbete, because we've agreed already that this is an unacceptable situation. And what I'm really trying to establish from you is whether you think that the person who was the speaker at the time bore a personal responsibility to do whatever was necessary to address these two problems. The first was the failure of the JSCI to report to Parliament, and the second was the failure of Parliament to appoint an Inspector General of Intelligence.
I'm prepared to take responsibility if that's what I need to do, Chairperson, because I was Speaker. But that I could have done anything about it is a matter of detail that I don't, sitting here, am not prepared to say I was consciously responsible for.
Are you implying by that although you now realize that those facts are correct, at the time it didn't even occur to you that that was the problem?
Not to the extent that I now know.
All right. In paragraph 23 of your affidavit, you deal with something that's also been debated in quite some detail before the Commission. It's the problem of tracking resolutions. Yes. Now, the evidence of Mr. Gordy, if I recall correctly, if you take SCOPA as an example, but it wouldn't be confined to SCOPA, is that the Portfolio Committee prepares a report, submits the report to the House, and in the ordinary course, the House adopts the reports of portfolio committees. Are you with me so far?
Pardon? I'm sorry, Chairperson.
He was just telling you what the evidence has revealed in terms of committees making resolutions and how they take them forward. But the problem, one of the problems being to track whether they are implemented and so on by the executive. Did I get that right, Mr. Freund?
Chair, maybe it would be simpler if I repeat and do it slowly.
Yes,
yeah. Ms. Mbete, is it correct that it routinely happens that portfolio committees issue reports which are submitted to the National Assembly for consideration and adoption if thought appropriate?
Mm-hmm.
And is it correct that when those reports
that was yes.
Pardon?
That was yes.
Yes.
Your answer, yeah. Okay.
And is it correct that when those reports contain proposals or recommendations or matters that need to be attended to, the procedure is for the Speaker to convey that to the responsible minister?
Yes, Chairperson.
Now, the allegation made by Mr. Gordy, but similar allegations have been made elsewhere. They're consistent, for example, with the evidence of the late Mr. Makwetu, the former Auditor General. The allegation is that there was no process in place to track and monitor to what extent, if any, ministers responded to such requirements or instructions or recommendations. Is that factually accurate?
It is true, Chairperson. Actually, I believe the mechanism is still missing, and in my brief interaction with Mr. Frolick, I did find that it is one of the areas, in fact, that I'm also proposing must be strengthened, must receive attention.
And I think you addressed that, if I can refer you to paragraph 25.1 of your affidavit. Is that correct?
25.1
at page 992.
Yes.
Where you say, I acknowledge that there may be areas where follow-up on the implementation of recommendations may be improved, and I'm informed that there are steps being taken to address the situation.
Yes, yes.
What is your understanding of the situation right now, if any, if you have any inside knowledge?
Not in detail, but I know it's receiving attention because it is the one place in the committee section that could do a lot to boost the capabilities of the committee section to help us with the oversight function of Parliament.
I want to change the subject again. I don't want to belabor the point, but I want to take you to paragraph 28.
Yes.
You will see that this is the paragraph in which you deal with the issue of criticism of the lack of independence of the Speaker. And I don't propose to get involved in a discussion about what you personally did or did not do when you were Speaker, and whether there was or was not any bias. I don't think it would be constructive at all. But I would like to discuss with you the principle. And here, in your case, you served as chairperson of the African National Congress. You sat in on its meetings, presumably of the NEC, and you were a very active participating member of the ANC. Do you not think that the person who serves as Speaker for the duration that he or she serves as Speaker should refrain from active involvement in the politics of the political party that appointed him or her?
Chairperson, it's not a point on which I can express, violently strong views, but I don't see that there's any problem with the current system we have. We've had that system since Frini Jinwala, our first Speaker. We decided this is our system, and it has worked very well. Because also, Chairperson, every MP from every party comes from a political party space. That's why actually Parliament itself makes specific arrangements for them to satisfy that particular role of the reality of them having come from competition between political parties. And that competition in the election results in the people that get, the number of people that get elected, and they end up being the MPs. So that we must now pretend that this one person, the very president themselves, are president of their party. Everybody comes there as a member of a political party. But you get there and you learn how to play your role in a specific responsibility you get given in that space. So if you have to be the chief whip, you are a chief whip from a party. But you are also accepted and embraced as this person that coordinates the views of political parties represented by different chief whips. So sometimes, suddenly somebody just pretends there's a horrible thing happening. A person who's a national chairperson of a political party is also a speaker. It's that way. That's how it is everywhere in the world. You come from a political party, but you play a role, and the question is, are you playing your role according to the protocols of that role, of that office? Are you playing your role according to the rules of the institution of that particular office? And that's what guides a person who gets given the role of Speaker. And I used to always say in Parliament, do you know that if you were to put to me a president of the country called F.W. de Klerk, I would play my role as Speaker in relation to that president the very same way as I'm playing for a president who comes from my political party, because I understand the imperatives of the office I am in and the role I am playing when I'm sitting in that chair.
At a practical, okay, at a practical level, if there is an issue that your party has to deliberate on and take a position on, and you are Speaker of the National Assembly, and that issue is going to come before you, and there are deliberations, you are part of the leadership of your party, would you recuse yourself from those deliberations, or would you be party to those deliberations? And if you would be, maybe irrespective of whether you would be part of the deliberations or not, if you have to make a decision now, wearing your hat as the Speaker, but you know that your party has taken a certain decision on the issue, maybe you were part of the deliberations, how does that work at a practical level? Is the position that there ought to be, and maybe there is understanding, that even if you are part of the deliberations, when you are sitting there, you are wearing a different cap, and therefore you are free to decide as you see it, and there should be no complaints from the party that you made that decision, maybe which they might not like? How does it work practically?
I don't know, Chairperson, whether you want us to go to the 8th of August.
I don't want
because it's a specific event.
I'm not touching any.
You are not being specific, I know, but I'm saying your description sounds very much like it fits that occasion. It's a difficult moment. It's a very difficult moment, but it's a moment for which, if you've been Speaker, you've been playing every day. Because every day you have to apply the rules on members of Parliament, not political parties sitting in the House. When you are presiding over the House, you see individual members of Parliament who have rights, are allowed opportunities by the rules, and that's what determines how you see what's happening in that House at that moment. So that, because you've taken the oath, remember, so that oath is to your role as an impartial person. Not, in fact, the first time I had to make a ruling over an MP who had done something and I had to do something drastic or chase them out of the House or something, it was an ANC MP. So you can't play the role of an impartial arbiter if you are seeing parties. You must see ordinary individual members of Parliament who have rights in the House as people who have come to represent people out there. It has so happened, Chairperson, that in our lifetime, it is one of those things that have happened in my own life, in my own role, that I suddenly had to be in a space where there was this difficult choice of what position do I land on as the presiding officer, not as a member of caucus. The fortunate thing is that as Speaker, you hardly attend regular caucus meetings. because the responsibilities you have on a regular basis are just so much that you will squeeze and make time and go all out to attend a particular caucus meeting of particular interest. Maybe there's one of the leaders from, maybe the president is coming or the deputy president or something like that. But it's a difficult decision, but you have to learn to play that role honestly, to it, to the office. No other consideration. And that's what happens. And yes, your neck can be chopped, and that possibility is always there. So as you take that position, you know your neck.
Yeah, I'm sure it can't be an easy position. Thank you, Mr. Freund.
Thank you.
I know, I see that I think we've done more than 2 hours. We could take a break, or if we are close to finishing, we could finish, but we could take a break and then come back.
I don't mind doing that. I'm in your hands. I could finish quite quickly if you'd like me to try to do so.
Well, as long as you do justice to...
Chair, I think 5 or 10 minutes would probably do it.
Would that still be fine with you?
It will be fine, Chairperson.
Okay, all right. Let's continue and then finish them.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mbete, one of the issues, one of the instruments of oversight to which you draw attention in paragraph 10.4 of your affidavit is questions and answers. Yes. And you're clearly correct when you say that that is an oversight mechanism, and you're clearly correct when you say it's a mechanism that is used and has been used. But this commission has heard evidence of 2 types of problems in relation to questions and answers in the House. There's been evidence of failure to submit answers within the time required, or at all, and there's been evidence of questions that are simply evaded and never properly answered. Could you comment on both those problems, the delay issue and the evasion issue?
Well, with the delaying issue, we would have to rely on our management to assist us in following up. We would also use the mechanism of the structure of 3, which involved the deputy president, who is the leader of government business, the chief whip, and the speaker. We often put our heads together to deal with issues of that nature, so that the deputy president would take those issues to cabinet meetings, and in fact, apparently a lot of naming and shaming would obtain in that space through the leader of government business. On the second one, Mr. Freund, you were saying? Evasion.
Answers
the
that
evasion, yes, that's one that usually created a lot of tension between me in the chair and probably the members of the opposition have been complaining about that here. But the point is, you cannot determine the words, the choice of words of a minister or a member of the executive. You can't choose their answers for them. And yes, I probably agree with this MP who's complaining, but they would kind of want to force me into a corner of determining and choosing the words for someone who's supposed to answer the question, which my answer would be, please ask a follow-up question. Find another mechanism of pursuing the matter. But there is nothing I can do about the fact that the honorable member has answered. And in an unsatisfactory way, as far as you are concerned, I accept that maybe, but it's not a matter that is in my hands to determine.
Well, Ms. Mbete, I fully understand you.
Pardon?
I fully understand you when you say that the person who puts the question cannot dictate to the answerer what form of words the person answering will use. That's obviously correct. But is there not a difference between the way in which it's answered and whether it's answered in truth at all? And does the speaker not bear a responsibility to ensure that the question is in fact answered? And I have the impression that you don't accept that. So could you clarify your views?
Chairperson, I think it's unfair to expect the speaker to preempt an answer. The speaker receives the questions so that you apply your mind on them. Whether they are questions that are fair to the person to whom they are being posed, or perhaps they ought to be directed elsewhere, and those kinds of things. So, but to try and get the presiding officer into a role that they are actually not involved in, because I'm not in the executive. I simply am ensuring that they respond here to issues that are being raised in Parliament. To then want the speaker to go beyond that, I think is unfair.
Well, let me put it this way. Are you saying that even where, as the speaker, having listened to the question and having listened to the answer, it's clear to you that the member of minister has manifestly avoided the question and therefore has not answered the question, the speaker has no role to play? Or are you saying where it's manifestly clear that the question has not been answered, the minister has avoided to answer the question, the speaker has a role to play to say, Minister, you have not answered the question, but where there may be an argument whether he has answered, she has answered, or she has not, then the speaker should rather not get involved.
It's actually, Chairperson, the speaker must not be thrust into that space. It's an unfair role to try to make a presiding officer to determine whether the question is answered satisfactorily. It's not for them to determine that. They must ensure that they are presiding and the executive is there to answer the questions.
Yes.
But to say now you must figure out, and I mean, who determines what is fair and what is not fair? And most of the time, members of the executive want to give the information. So they welcome the opportunity to come to the House and answer questions by way of putting that information before Parliament and before the public representatives.
Are you saying that the remedy of the member of Parliament who is not satisfied with the answer is to ask a follow-up question?
To ask a follow-up question.
Yeah, and not ask the speaker to rule on whether the question, the answer is a proper answer or not. Okay, Mr. Freund.
Well, I want to just explore that a little further, because as I understand your own evidence, the right to ask questions and the right to ask questions is part of the oversight structures and the structures by which Parliament discharges its constitutional obligation to ensure that the executive is accountable to it. Now, if the Speaker can see that the executive is not answering a question, does the Speaker not have a responsibility to hold the executive to account? And when the Speaker can see that a question is not being answered, surely a duty does rest on the Speaker to require a question to be answered. Absent that, there can be no accountability.
Chairperson, I am strongly not agreeing with the notion of saying the Speaker can tell. Who says the Speaker can tell? The Speaker is there, has made sure that the questions got to the executive. The executive has come to the House, is answering the question. Why must you now put the speaker into that space of determining what is right and the extent to which it is right? I can't know. You cannot know, and you must not put the speaker in a position where the speaker must determine, because the speaker's interest is the information coming. That's what the speaker is interested in. If the member is not satisfied, let them follow the matter up, not drag the presiding officer into that space.
Mr. Freund?
Finally, Ms. Mbete, Chair, unless you wanted to ask a question on that issue. Finally, I just want to take you very briefly to the events of the 8th of August 2017. I don't think that there's any factual controversy. I don't think there's anything in which we really need much evidence. The situation, as I understand it, is that you were, as a result of the judgment of the Constitutional Court, made aware that you had a discretion to exercise as to whether the ballot would be secret or not. You exercised that discretion by saying it would be secret on that particular occasion. And if I'm not mistaken, I think you even went further, but this I'd like you to confirm, to say that members should not suffer adverse consequences for voting in accordance with what they took to be their duties. Am I right in everything I put to you there?
I think so. I think that was put into, I cannot now firmly say I determined that, but I know that it was the condition. We were interested to ensure that the MPs felt free to exercise their own choice in the matter.
Thank you. Chair, I have no further questions.
Well, I think it's likely that it is true that you went further, as Mr. Freund suggests, because the Constitutional Court judgment, which obviously you would have studied and received advice on,
Yes.
was to that effect, as far as I recall.
Yes, Chairperson.
That there should be no adverse consequences to members of Parliament who decide to vote in a certain way.
Yes, Chairperson.
Yeah.
It's true. I remember now.
You remember now? Yes, yeah. Okay, Mr. Freund has finished his questions. I don't have any further questions.
Are you sure, Mr. Freund?
Ms. Mbete, don't tempt fate. I could take you to 2 hours.
Don't tempt
Try not to prevail upon everybody, to burden everybody.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes,
Chairperson.
I just want to confirm with your counsel that he has nothing. Mr. Semenya?
I do not have any questions,
Yes.
Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Mbete. We appreciate that you availed yourself, even in the evening, to come and assist the Commission.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I just want to once again thank everybody who has made it possible for the Commission to sit this evening, the staff, the technicians, of course, Ms. Mbete and her legal team, and the legal team, Mr. Freund, and everybody. Thank you to all of you. We'll now adjourn, and tomorrow I will be hearing evidence relating to ESCOM during the day. That is just for the benefit of the public. We adjourn.